You are the magician. The doctor is just your assistant. But you don't stop there. For centuries, we have thought of ourselves as immensely complicated machines. We are more than that. Dr. Joel Elkes, Professor Emeritus at Johns Hopkins.
The machine is a concept which has had its time. What we are talking about, really, is an entity, a mind-body, body-mind entity. One word, one concept, one whole.
An example of that unity. This biofeedback machine is measuring my skin's resistance to conducting electricity. The more relaxed I am, the higher the resistance, and the higher the number reads. The clap made microscopic drops of perspiration form on my hand. My resistance goes down, and the numbers go down into the 70s. I was startled, which is an emotion, and my body changed. I thought sweat. The mind-body, the body-mind, one thing. Another example, from the gray world of cancer. When cancer victims are treated with chemotherapy, sometimes their hair falls out. Dr. Carl Simonton, a cancer specialist.
There was a situation where they were doing a study on people with advanced lung cancer. 2 groups received routine chemotherapy and 1 received water injections. And out of the group that received water injections, 40 of those people, 30.8%, lost their hair. And there's no explanation, to me, outside of belief that will explain the loss of hair in those 40 people. When our emotions change, the way I think about it, very practically, is when I am depressed, my entire body is depressed. Not only am I depressed in my thoughts, I am depressed in my entire body, and my body functions differently. And when I am happy, when I am joyous, not only am I emotionally joyous, but my entire body is joyous.
Thoughts, feelings, joys, deaths, how the body senses these, psychobiology, the way thoughts and feelings and attitudes and images and so on are translated into biology, are becoming really well-established, well-recognized disciplines.
Your emotions have a physical presence. A laugh floats by in the bloodstream. And grief? How often have we heard of how, after a long marriage, a husband or wife dies, and within weeks, the survivor dies? When you grieve body, mind, and spirit. But turn the coin, and you find the will to live. California. Norman Cousins, a writer. Although he has no medical degree, he is on the faculty of the School of Medicine at the University of California. He got an excruciatingly painful disease in the tissue that binds the cells together. The doctor said it was 500 to 1 against a recovery. A death sentence.
I thought they were crazy. Never expected to die, certainly not. I don't know what the expectations were of others, but I had no intention of departing this vale prematurely.
Cousins decided that a hospital was no place to be when you're sick. Germs everywhere, bad food. He couldn't even get a good night's sleep. So he moved out. He moved into a hotel with his doctor as a reluctant partner. They worked together, they came up with new treatments, but it was Cousins himself who dreamed up the idea that he would laugh himself back to health. His medicine? The old classic comedies.
It is a divine experience to be able to recognize that while life is serious, it need not be solemn.
I can't find his mouth.
It seemed to me unreasonable to believe that the human body and spirit worked only one way. That the only time the emotions had an effect on your chemistry, on your physiology, was if the emotions were negative.
Hand me that stethoscope, will you? Thanks. Will you say ah, please? Ah. Again? Ah. Again? Ah. I almost had it. Again? Ah. Huh? Ah. Oh. Ah. Ah. There it is. Ah. And a very pretty thing, too.
The main effect of laughter, love, hope, faith, will to live is that it serves as a counteracting agent, as a protector against the effects of the negative emotions. Now, we know specifically that the negative emotions are bullets in the body. The positive emotions, therefore, are the bulletproof vest.
It took him 2 years, but Norman Cousins beat the odds. He made a complete recovery.
Correctly, he didn't have any.
Back in Toronto,
I'm not sure.
I'm talking with Dr. David Osoba, a cancer specialist at the Toronto Bayview Clinic. Doctor, what does this first X-ray show us here?
Well, this is an X-ray of an adult male, I would say, and the obvious feature here is a small, round density, which is a little over a centimeter in size, and this looks like a tumor.
Tell me, what are the chances of that being the only one that this patient has?
The fact that the tumor is that size, and there are no other tumors visible in the chest, makes it possible that that is a single tumor.
Are there any odds, any statistics to, well, what are the odds it's single?
The odds might be 15 to 20% that that's single.
So 4 chances to 1, there'll be a second tumor. And if a second tumor does develop, the cancer will probably
I
kill.
think that probably has more to do.
Another doctor gave the chances of survival as 500 against. The man who had the tumor, Doug Scott.
Well, I felt shocked, traumatized, afraid, helpless, doomed, thought I was going to die.
His only chance was surgery. But first he took a holiday in California. In California, he started reading about holistic healing, about treating himself as a whole person, not just as a body that's damaged.
The importance of the will to live, mobilizing the life force. So the change was from feeling helpless and doomed and very uncertain about my prospects to now recognizing that there was something I could do to help myself.
And, if he wasn't to recover, to make his peace with that.
So I was running 34 miles a day, sometimes twice a day. And at the end of the run, where I turned around, was the beginning of a small mountain. So each day I ran a little higher up the mountain. Very symbolic. I came back determined that I was going to survive.
Doug Scott went under the knife. What about the second X-ray? What do we see there?
Well, in this X-ray, this shows the chest of a person who's had an operation and a portion of the rib is missing. I don't see the tumor any longer. I do not see any other tumors in the chest.
When I woke up from the surgery, I felt renewed, reborn, new.
He changed his lifestyle. He practiced yoga. He drastically changed his eating habits. He meditated. And he practiced imagery.
Visualizing the tumor on my lung and seeing the tumor surrounded by white blood cells surrounding and containing it. And then I summoned up an image of white Doberman pinchers with large, sharp teeth who tore at the tumor to break it down.
When the tumor was cut out, the tissue went to the pathology lab to be examined.
And one of the things was that there was a very lively action of healthy tissue surrounding the tumor, which was exactly what I'd been visualizing.
Doctors would see no reason to look past the surgery to explain Doug Scott's cure. There was a tumor, a surgeon cut it out. Simple. Doug Scott says that you must look deep to the inner reality.
What we're talking about is subjective knowing, deep inner knowing, which is the truest kind of knowing. I experienced it. I was there, closer than anybody else in the world, so I know.
4 years later, Doug Scott shows no sign of the cancer coming back. 16 years after his first near-fatal disease, Norman Cousins had his second contact with death.
Well, it was all very embarrassing because I was supposed to be a walking health exhibit. I couldn't argue with the good Lord for the fact that it happened. I had been battling the airports and the airlines and the schedules and the time zones, so my body was trying to get my attention. And it did in a very dramatic way.
In the middle of the danger, he noticed panic was being induced in him. He asked the driver to turn the siren off and go slowly.
Almost everything that happens dramatizes to the patient the fact that he's on his way out and not on his way in.
His friends gathered around his bed.
I could read the grave apprehension in their eyes, and I felt that it was important to reassure them. And so I said, gentlemen, I want you to know that you're looking at the damnedest healing machine that's ever been wheeled into this hospital.
Cousins survived that most dangerous first 24 hours. Then, once more, he took a hand in his own treatment.
I wanted to see whether what had worked before might work again. And even though my cardiologist was very apprehensive about it and very uncertain, I felt that only one of us was uncertain, only one of us was apprehensive. And then as I told him, I said, if it doesn't work, there's always your table to come back to. But we measured the progress week by week, and there was the evidence that the heart was growing stronger. And the most interesting thing of all was the evidence that the heart was creating its own bypass. And that a rich new network of blood vessels was being formed, bringing oxygen into the heart to meet its needs.
He was optimistic, he was positive, and he got well again. I have here pills that will improve the health of 1 out of every 3 people in the world. Look at the name. Placebos. Placebos. They have absolutely no active ingredients. None. They're dead pills. But if you believe, they're pure magic. Because you are magic. If you believe.
You speak about the placebo. All the placebo does is to give us evidence of the fact that biochemical changes can be brought about in the body as the result of what we think. That's what a placebo is. It's a transference of expectations into physical reality. When you take a pill, if you expect something to happen, most of the time it will.
Ah, what a nuisance we are to science. Faith in a pill, faith in a doctor. Even if the doctor is not a very good doctor, if you have faith in him, you're likely to get well. And yet, we wonder, is he telling us the truth?
A healer heals by giving a person a sense of both what the realities say of an illness is, but also by giving the element of hope. A healer heals by being with a person, but at the same time also being outside. It is this subtle play of the within and the without by which a healer really operates, but mainly, first and last, by mobilizing a person's capacity.
In the final analysis, the physician is not the healer. You are the healer. The doctor's job is to make it possible for your body to do the job it was intended to do.
Laughter, robust confidence, the will to live, powerful partners to push us towards health. And there's faith. Faith in a pill, in a doctor. But the faith with the greatest healing power is religious faith.
The need to believe must have fulfilled an evolutionary function. It wouldn't have stayed around for 400 generations or so if it didn't. Religion was an attempt to make a map of the universe, to understand the way the universe related to us. I've never understood people arguing that there is a an adversary position between science and religion. I've never understood it. It seemed to me that people who say so don't understand either science or religion. It is always the dialectic between mystery and explanation. Mystery and explanation are mirror images of each other. The deeper the explanation, the deeper the mystery.
St. Joseph's Oratory in Montreal, a religious shrine, a healing shrine. People flock to shrines like this, and they are healed. Healed in spirit, and amazingly often healed in body. Crutches, abandoned, and leg braces, even the leg braces of children. Most of the healings can be attributed to the wonder within us, our inner healer, triggered by the most powerful, positive emotion there is, triggered by faith in God. In Lourdes, in France, out of the tens of thousands of cures, there are listed about 100 cures, rigorously examined, which cannot be explained by science. The Church calls these miracles. Father Jean-Marc Laporte.
And I think there has to be some kind of a faith in mystery, an openness to, well, let's say, powers beyond oneself. I personally, as a Christian, would believe that a person who believes in Jesus Christ, well, would find, well, this kind of a healing process more likely to happen because, well, Jesus is a particular way of bringing to focus, well, that particular reality which we call God.
At these shrines, we notice that amputated legs don't grow back and glass eyes aren't abandoned, not even toupees are thrown away. There seems to be cures within limits. Why is this? Is there limits to God's action here?
If that's true, I mean, I haven't studied the evidence here, I would think that it's because that normally, in the normal course of events, as far as miracles are concerned, that, well, that divine healing energy and power has to meet some kind of a power of healing within the person, and there's kind of a collaboration, a working together. And, well, perhaps in these cases that this does not take place, or this is not possible. I don't know. This is a very mysterious question.
It is now 5.5 years since Doug Scott had the operation for the tumor on his lung. Today, there is no sign of cancer.
Shall we start? Let's start with joining hands in.
Every person in this room has cancer, except Doug Scott.
Awareness in your body.
Once a week, he gives thanks. He leads this group in the techniques which he says were vital to his recovery.
Let all the thoughts of the past day and
meditation, relaxation, imaging.
Go for a while. And when you're ready, let go of the hands. Gently open your eyes and be here.
Usually there are members missing, in hospital, or ill from the side effects of the chemotherapy or the radiation.
Sharing news?
She has her down days, she said, but she also has her up days this time to think.
That's a lot of good news.
I almost thought he'd carry her. She was so weak. And last week she walked in, was much stronger.
Yeah.
So I feel...
Groups like this one are often called Simonton groups, after the controversial Texas cancer specialist.
Well, I think I'm getting better. I really feel better. I didn't know you were taking chemotherapy again.
Well,
every so often, one of them dies. They fight for their lives. Now they're using mental imagery.
Now take a gentle, deep breath as you move the white healing light up through your pelvis. Feel the warmth of it as it surrounds your heart, the white healing light.
Changed my light, mixed supernatural and the radiation treatment. Really felt good, more golden.
Very wonderful for me. It seems to restore my faith, and I feel so much better when I finish with it.
Light again around your heart. feel the gel warm?
Diffused white light, soft, soothing to move it around down into my foot.
Any cancer, or have had?
Dr. Carl Simonton says the particular images are not important.
What's really important is helping the person elevate their energy. Then their images will spontaneously change, or the images that they are using will become more potent.
I went to Waterloo. I went to see a dentist named Dr. Rausch.
And this is referred to as waking hypnosis. Now,
He has just told me that I will feel what he feels, and that he will feel no pain.
I'm going to make my arm numb, and I'm going to put a needle through the arm, and I want no discomfort, okay?
This may look like a parlor trick, but its meaning runs deep.
Now,
If it works, it is one more example of how you cannot divide the mind from the body. But more, it shows that the mind can protect us from unnecessary distress.
Because I won't be feeling anything. All right. Now, I want your help, and just take a good hefty chunk of, how's that? Here's a needle. Now, remember, the skin is very sensitive to begin with, right? Now, I can do this quickly. I can do it slowly. And there, you can see it coming out the other side. Right? And I feel nothing. Okay? Now, there it is. No problem. Even though you're wide awake and alert, take it with that hand. You feel what I feel. Nothing. Do it slowly. Push. Push.
So help me, I'm pushing a needle through my own arm.
Let's talk about it. Look at it, and you can see there's quite a bit there. That's a big chunk.
Yes.
Now, again, here. No, I mean, you can do with it what you want. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Incredible.
All right. Same thing happens to you.
Dr. Rausch had his gallbladder removed. No anesthetic. He hypnotized himself.
I find it absolutely astounding. Absolutely astounding.
The ways are multiplying that let us reach in beneath the skin, that let us fine-tune who we are. The wise old ways, meditation, relaxation, and the new ways, biofeedback, self-hypnosis, imagery.
In the old days, the body, the mind, and the so-called spiritual life were all of a piece. Medicine has been fractionated, and between the person and themselves and the person physician, there has been interposed a vast armamentarium of medical technology, which has made it impersonal. So whereas on the one hand, you have the territory of medicine, which is very, very well mapped. The boulevards are in, the houses are in, the territory is very well lit. The territory of well-being is relatively sparsely populated at the moment. There are signs posted here and there. There's a road here and a house there, and somebody is doing something very interesting here and there. But it is not yet mapped appropriately. And the new physician will be as expert in reading the computer data and laboratory data, but at the same time he will have more time, not less time, to interact with a patient and to be a real person who guides, who advises, who heals.
The new knowledge, it's here. You must still hold on to your doctor, but as a partner, because we are in the self-repair business. We get these tantalizing glimpses of what wondrous beings we are. We do have limits, but how far from them are we? What manner of being are we?
There's no more fluid in the lower part of the chest, and there is now some scarring in place of where the rib was taken out. There is no evidence that there is any tumor present,